Chapter 78, Divine Blood 1. And night passed. Although the morning sun wasn't as strong as it was at noon, it still flowed domineeringly into the room through the window. It seemed that regardless of whether you were willing or not, as long as you didn't choose to hide under the eaves, it would land on the ground and land on you regardless of your objections. It wanted to use its warmth to awaken everyone who was sleeping. Xu Qing slowly opened his eyes. Looking at the light outside the window, his body seemed to have absorbed the summoning from the sunlight. As his blood and qi flowed, Xu Qing stood up. After stretching his body, he pushed open the door and cautiously surveyed his surroundings before disappearing into the distance. In the city, after daybreak, everything was different from the night. The breakfast shops opened one after another, and it was the same for a large number of shops. The crowd slowly increased, but it was still cold and hurry. It was as though everyone was surviving under immense pressure. However, occasionally, the sounds of children studying could be heard from the high walls. This seemed to represent that there was a certain level of order in this main city. Xu Qing, who was walking on the streets, thought of a medicinal herb called the twin flowers that grandmother Bai had introduced. It was a strange grass that coexisted with light and darkness. It was inseparable. Perhaps this is the norm in large cities. Young people tend to accept new things faster than adults. This point was very well reflected by Xu Qing. It didn't take long for him to accept everything. After a simple breakfast, he also inquired about the time for the entry test. Regarding the entry test, the people in the city weren't unfamiliar with it. After learning that the daily test would be held at noon and at a certain location, Xu Qing spent the entire morning observing the Seven Blood Eyes main city. This was his habit. After some observation, Xu Qing gained some understanding of the structure of the main city. It was just that the time was too short and the main city was too big. It was the size of tens of thousands of scavenger campsites. At the same time, there were many areas that only the Seven Blood Eyes disciples could enter. Hence, it was difficult for him to observe everything at once. However, he also found a path that led to the city gate. After confirming the buildings on the way, Xu Qing looked at the sky and walked toward the test location he had inquired about. The location of the Seven Blood Eyes entry test was located at the southern edge of the city, at the foot of the Truth Mountain Range. Further south were the 7 giant peaks of the Seven Blood Eyes. From afar, 7 winding mountain paths extended to different peaks amidst the greenery. In this place, there was a huge public square. At this moment, the surroundings of the public square were covered by a light screen, blocking out the people from the outside world. Only those with tokens could enter. When Xu Qing arrived, there were already dozens of people waiting in the surroundings of the square. These people were all around the age of 17 or 18 years old. Some of their clothes were plain, some were luxurious, some were clean, and some were covered in filth like Xu Qing. They were all people who had come from various places to participate in the test. At the center of the square, 3 middle-aged cultivators were standing there. The spirit energy fluctuations from each of them had reached a terrifying level. They seemed to be slightly stronger than the Diamond Sex ancestor. They chatted and laughed as they waited for the test to begin. However, their gazes would occasionally land on the surrounding disciples, as though they were weighing the pros and cons in their hearts. This scene made Xu Qing even more cautious. He wasn't good at socializing, so he quietly found a place. He wasn't too far away from the crowd, nor was he too close. As he stood there and waited, he also noticed that the people who were taking the test around him had a certain level of cultivation. This was especially so for a youth dressed in a long blue robe. He held a fan in his hand, and while his clothes were luxurious, he was also very handsome. As he chatted and laughed, he attracted the attention of the other examinees in the surroundings. "I'll share it with everyone." The 7 districts of the Seven Blood Eyes main city are divided into 7 mountain peaks. These 7 mountain peaks are all different in their expertise, so they each have their characteristics. For example, the 7th peak manages the port area. They have great authority and their cultivation arts are very special. Therefore, the combat strength of their disciples is astonishing. They travel far all year round and are accompanied by the Forbidden Sea. Another example is the 1st peak. For example, the sharp swords of the sect are mostly used for training within the Phoenix Forbidden Land. Therefore, every single one of them is an incomparably cold-blooded battle cultivator. They rarely go out to sea and most of them use the Forbidden Zone as their tomb. They kill there and die there. These two peaks are the banners of the 7 blood eyes. Every year, too many people wanted to join them. However, these two peaks are very strict when it comes to accepting disciples. It's not that you chose them but that they chose you. Unless you have a specific token, you can't enter. As for the other peaks, although they also require a token, it's a two-way choice. As long as one passes the test, one can register. Among them, the 6th summit has weapons refinement, the 5th summit has formations, the 4th summit has beast taming, the 3rd summit has strange techniques, and the 2nd summit specializes in alchemy. However, no matter which peak you join, before you reach the foundation establishment realm, and have the right to gain benefits from the 7 blood eyes, your survival will be very cruel unless you are the owners of the core token. As for how cruel it is, you can experience it yourself after you pass the test. The youth smiled as he introduced to the people around him. At the same time, he was also observing them. As for Xu Qing, who wasn't far away, after he heard these words, he noticed the cruelty in the other party's words as well as the 7 blood eyes' right to profit. He could understand the literal meaning of the former, but he didn't understand the latter. His heart was filled with doubts, but now wasn't the time to think about these things. Right now, he was mainly analyzing which peak was more suitable for him. Unfamiliar with the Forbidden Zone, Xu Qing felt that the 1st summit was suitable for him, but he didn't know if his token was qualified.